And we are back here at the Snake Bros Institute for Advanced Coprolite Studies. Some people are saying we're saying that wrong, so I'll say it like they want. Coprolites. Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance. Because we don't know shit about what the hell is going on. Actually,
we don't know ancient shit.
I've actually had some people ask, like, so, like, can I get one of those certificates of ignorance? So maybe we need to make some, so we can send them to people. Yeah, you get a certificate of ignorance from the Snake Bros Institute. All right, agriculture, ancient agriculture. So, what's so interesting about ancient farmers? You want to have a go at this?
Well, first you gotta build a straw hat. And that's incredibly complex. And then you got to have boots. And those are even harder to build.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think boot technology didn't. You got to be up to par on your boot technology.
Yeah. Snake boots.
Yeah.
You got to have snake boots. No, it's, the idea is that you take some natural growing grass, a type of grass, or it's got some tiny little seeds on it.
Yeah.
And then you sort of genetically modify them by cross breeding them in some way, or whatever they call it, until the little seeds on it are
right. You cull them somehow.
You cull them and somehow until they're getting bigger and bigger and more seeds, and you get rid of the one. You stop planting the seeds of the ones that didn't have as many seeds.
Yeah.
And you get more and more seeds, and you keep doing that for how long? I don't know how long it takes. I don't think anybody really knows how long it takes to turn a small weed into a corn stalk.
Right.
Or a small
turn some kind of like native grass weed into wheat.
That's just loaded with the seeds on. It's cultivated.
So basically, the idea is like the standard model says that they culled it over long periods of time, but long periods of time we're talking about generations, and I don't mean generations of crops. I mean people.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why the story is weird, is because when you really think about that, number one, planting a field of crops is not easy.
No, it's not.
And then maintaining them is not easy. It's a lot of work. So there needs to be some sort of payback. Well, if you just like plant a field of like native grasses, you can't eat them.
Or they're so low in any proteins and.
All right, and then you have to. I mean, how are you going to harvest it? Like, the way we harvest the wheat now, you got these big, beautiful, and you can go out there and sort of cut them off, and you've got enough grains mixed in with all the. But if you're doing it with like just grass, it's So there was a big change that happened with the Ice Age. Okay, number one, sea levels rose 400 feet, and that drowned like tens of millions of square miles of coastal lowlands that now no longer exist and haven't for the past 10,000 years, right? And the coastal lowlands are always the most fertile places. That's where everybody lives, and that's where you do all your planting. That's where all the good dirt is, right? Because it all washes down there from the highlands. The higher you climb, the rockier it gets, right?
Yeah.
This is just nature. The peaks of mountains are just rock. There's no dirt. So, suddenly we lost all these coastal lowlands that were the most fertile places on the planet. Now, whether or not there were giant, enormous cities down there that were incredibly advanced, I don't know. I think so. But the point is that that's where all the food was. And it was drowned within, we're talking about, it just didn't take thousands of years to happen. Meltwater Pulse 1b, which is the second devastating thing that ended the Ice Age for good, was what geologically is called an isochron. It happens very fast, and we're talking in some cases a matter of weeks here. It's called Meltwater Pulse 1b, and that means that glaciers that were all over the highlands in North America,
in some cases miles thick,
suddenly melted and dumped all their water into the oceans and rose the sea levels hundreds of feet in weeks. Okay. Now, in some places that wouldn't be a big deal because you got cliffs or whatever like that. But there are places where you raise the sea level 10 feet and the water will go inland for tens of miles.
Yeah.
Many, many miles, 10 feet of ocean sea level rise. Just watch any storm surge during a hurricane, or even like some of the tsunamis that have happened. Like a 30-foot tsunami is an enormous problem and a gigantic natural disaster. Imagine hundreds of feet. And that's not including if there were tidal waves from whatever caused the cataclysm, from giant earthquakes and so on and so forth. So you get drowned coastal lowlands. And then after that, all of a sudden, there's archaeological evidence of this all over the world. People suddenly start playing with agriculture in certain places. Now, in other places, people remained hunter-gatherers or whatever for long periods of time. Or became hunter-gatherers or something. But the point is that around the site of Göbekli Tepe, for example, it's well accepted now that in that same area, native grasses there were suddenly turned into agricultural plants. Now, that's a big deal. Like, again, the standard model idea is that people took these grasses and sort of went out and picked the good ones and took the seeds out of those good ones and then planted them somewhere. And then went out into that planting and took the good ones, the big fat or the fattest ones, and then took the seeds out of those and then planted them somewhere the next season. And then went out after they grew and picked the big ones. And you do that over and over and over until you have wheat.
And you also have to imagine if you're picking for seeds to plant, you don't get to eat much.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of seeds to plant a field.
Right.
So what are you eating?
Right.
While you're planning to plant the seeds from the few good plants that you're finding in the field. And then how do you get rid of the already established ones that aren't good? I mean, you have to get rid of them.
Yeah.
Because their seeds are all in the ground.
Right.
Like today we use things called pre-emergence they add an enzyme or something to the soil that will prohibit the seeds from germinating in the season. And then you can plant your special seeds in there.
Right. That are designed to work with that pre-emergence.
It's
But the point is that the story is impossible. Okay? You can't go from picking pears to pushing plows as George Howard said in one of our podcasts. A really pithy way to put it is that they went from picking pears. In other words, that there was a bountiful place where you could be a hunter-gatherer and it was kind of easy. Like the end of the Ice Age killed off a ton of species of animals that they just ceased to exist, right? So we can also imagine that it killed off a lot of plant species. You don't have a large animal die-off without also an enormous plant die-off. And there's a lot of evidence that a lot of the biomass on the planet was set on fire in these events, okay? So we can imagine that there was an enormous extinction event in the plant kingdom as well as the mammalian kingdom and,
right.
The animal kingdom. And who knows how many insects just disappeared and, we look at mammals when we're talking about extinction events. And when you're looking at older stuff, we're looking at birds and lizards. But like, it's hard to look at, extinction events of very tiny things or even plants. Like we know in paleontology, they found ferns fossilized ferns that don't exist anymore and so on and so forth. But we have no way of knowing what there was, except that we know that a lot of it died, right? And never came back. So the idea is that it's possible that previous to these cataclysmic events that ended the Ice Age, that these events that completely rewrote the surface of the planet in multiple ways and flooded like millions of square miles. I think that it's like the size of the United States and Europe combined or something like that was completely drowned in water all over the world. Something like that. But the point is that all of a sudden, if previous to that there was just hunter-gatherer cultures and everybody was primitive and they wore nothing but butt flaps, right? All the stuff they were used to was gone. And they had been bottlenecked into a very small population because almost everyone died, humans included. There are many known bottlenecks in human populations, and this is one of them, right? So there's a big bottleneck where previous to that there seems to have been people, and then there's this huge bottleneck where only a few people survived all over the world in tiny little groups. Okay, people survived to then procreate, basically. Probably more people survived the event, but a lot of them died off without procreating because some people survived on their own somehow.
Yeah.
You know,
or you might have entire groups of people that survived that just died out.
Right, because they couldn't find fresh water or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any number of things.
Right. So there's a huge bottleneck in the human population, plus animal populations all over the world that eventually ended up surviving anyway. But then there were enormous amounts of animals and plants that just ceased to exist completely. Okay. So if you think of the idea that before that was this idea of a paradise, of an Eden, of a golden age where it was kind of easy to live, right? This exists in mythological tales. The idea of Eden is a sort of a widespread thing in mythology all around the world, that there was an ancient golden age. Most of those also talk about the age of the gods, and that people were, in one way you can look at it as like they were spiritually advanced. In other ways it seems to be like they're talking about technology, and it's not clear which one it is. But the point is that life was easy and then it sucked, right?
Yeah.
But it's at this period, right after these destructions, that suddenly people suddenly become farmers. And that the story that's told that they were developing this agriculture stuff, like, you can't do that. You just can't. You have to have food now, which means that you can't say, well, let's take these grasses and then my grandchildren will be able to plant wheat. That doesn't work. You've got to eat now, or you won't have any grandchildren, right? So agriculture, in many cases, and then also what's known as domestic species of animals, are anomalous. No one really knows how they came about. There's always a story, like the most common one to talk about with people is dogs. Like, how did we get dogs? Period. The idea is like, well, there's a wolf, and somebody befriended wolves, and eventually you have
they kept the nice pup, the pup that was like the most calm, and then
right.
they bred that one. And
yeah. There's that meme that I was looking at where it shows the picture of the timber wolf, and it's like looking over there, and it's like, man, this human, I'm kind of hungry, and there's nothing to eat, but those humans got a fire, it looks warm, and maybe I can get some scraps. What's the worst thing that could happen? And it's like 10,000 years later, and it shows a pug wearing a birthday hat on his head or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's the standard model story, is that we took a wolf and we've turned him into hundreds of different dog species that are vastly different from each other. But that doesn't really... It's not really clear that that's what happened. That's the assumption, though, that we took wolves or some sort of canine animal species. Maybe there were canines that are completely gone now, that don't exist anymore, that got killed at the end of this thing, and then some people had a pug that they were carrying around.
Yeah.
The reason that story is told is because they're like, well, look at animal husbandry. Like, people, nobility in places all over the world for thousands of years were breeding horses into awesome running, race horses, or the strongest ones or whatever. And nobility liked to breed dogs too. And they would breed dogs, and they would try to get these traits in them that they liked, and they would breed for the traits, right? But you're like, okay, yeah, but who turned a wolf into a greyhound?
Yeah.
That's not clear. It's even more not clear as to how we turned aurochs into cattle. That's the story, though, is that aurochs became modern cattle, and they have traced this genetically. Like, okay, we can trace cattle all the way back to a single herd of 80 aurochs. That's the genetic information, the data that exists, right? But who went and got that aurochs and made them into cattle when you're starving, right? It's hard to explain this, but it's sort of just glossed over. Like, well, there were aurochs, and eventually somebody invented beer and was like, I can get that aurochs, and then they made cattle.
So are you suggesting that it's more likely that all of this happened prior to the destruction at the end of the last ice age?
That all of this stuff is a legacy? In other words, what it more looks like is that what was destroyed at the end of the ice age was an advanced civilization, and some of the remnants were people that had technology.
They brought the seeds with them to the mountaintops that were out of the water.
And then, of course, you read all the flood stories and all the myths, including the Bible, and they're told to do this: bring the animals, bring the plants that are good to eat.
Yep.
So on and so forth. Not every freaking plant or every animal on the planet, but all the ones that are good to eat and that are good for the earth and are good for people.
Right.
And like, for those of you who are sort of like, don't tell me about the Bible. Well, you can find this in like the story of Manu, which is an Indian story about the same thing, the flood, and some sort of deity says, Manu, there's going to be a gigantic something. You need to get a boat and you need to put on it like all these animals, and we're going to give you the seeds of these and this and all, carry all the seeds that are good for everything to eat, right? And also, by the way, carry these 7 sages. And the 7 sages represent all the knowledge in the world.
Yeah.
That will help people. In other cases, people were told to bury knowledge from their advanced civilization to go get it after the flood was over.
Right. There's the Zoroastrianism.
Right.
Zoroastrianism.
Right.
They were like, dig this massive cave and then put all the seeds and everything down in there and save all the best of everything.
Right.
And then, in the Varas.
The Varas, yes. And they found Varas. There are tons of ancient underground cities all throughout Turkey.
Complexes,
Yeah, complexes, not cities, but complexes that can hold 50,000 people in some cases. So that's a whole other subject. But the point is that, going back to the agriculture, one of the most fascinating things I found out about agriculture, the terracing, okay? So there's, in South America, the Inca Valley, which is basically goes from Lake Titicaca in Peru all the way up to Cusco. Okay, so basically it's a long valley in the Andes Mountains. And all along that valley, there are ancient cities that have been lived in for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And in those cases, just like we were talking about in the first segment, the bottommost layer of masonry is the most complex and least understood. Okay, attributed to the Inca, but by the standard model. But there's no evidence for that, right? The Inca, their stonework is a known thing, and it doesn't look anything like the stuff at the bottom of at the bottoms of the foundations of these buildings. Anyway, all along this valley, the mountains are terraced. Okay, the terracing is an unbelievably almost complete. You can't even explain the enormity of the project to terrace this entire valley and these mountainsides. And in some cases, the terracing goes all the way up underneath the glacial ice that is on top of the Andes Mountains that exists there now. Okay, glacial ice that has been there for thousands and thousands. Who knows? It's probably been there since the end of the ice age that melted everything. So that means that terracing is older than that glacier.
Yeah.
And it also it seems like the terraces were built from the top down. In other words, that the people who built the terraces started from the tops of the mountains and worked their way down as the water receded.
Yep.
And eventually, ice grew on top of the mountain. Because if you have water way up there,
you're not going to
have ice. But as the water receded and they went down the hills to stay close to the water and they kept building terraces, eventually glacial ice appeared on the tops of the mountains and covered their first terraces, right? There's some of this in the Americas, too. It's not accepted that way, but there are entire hills in the southwest of the Americas and down into Mexico that have terracing that go all the way to the tops of them. And that's the only hill in an entirely enormously flat plain of desert. Right?
Yeah, so you can imagine it's just ocean.
Right,
You're
it's
on
just
an island.
nothing but ocean, and they live on this tiny little island, and they're building the terraces down as the water goes down.
On top of the terraces, yeah.
Right. So those terraces are like, there's a lot of crazy, awesome, amazing stuff in Peru that you can look at. Almost nobody talks about the terracing, but those terraces are probably the most amazing architecturally thing built there. Like, every single terrace has to hold hundreds of thousands of tons of weight of material, and has done that for thousands of years against all elements and zero repairs. No one works on them, at least not in modern day. No one uses them, right? I mean, some of them are used, but you can see ancient terraces all over the place, and they're still there, and they're still holding back all that dirt from falling down.
Yeah.
So they're like little retaining walls, and they have been built to such perfection that they have not failed in thousands of years. Okay, and they were built for agricultural purposes in a place where no one would think to farm, right? You look at it and you're like, okay, everything is straight up and down, right? Everything's a freaking cliff. You have a river valley down at the bottom, and a kilometer up is a city on one side, and a kilometer up on the other side of the valley is the quarry that they built that city out of. And in between are all these terraces where they were farming, right? It's like,
It's crazy.
yeah. So the agriculture itself is anomalous because no one really understands, even though the story pretends to understand that these people just sort of, they were hunter-gatherers that eventually became sharecroppers, but it's just not. There's a big gap there. It's the underpants gap, right?
Yeah.
The underpants gnomes, right? You got step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, step 3, take over the world. It's the same problem. Step 1, hunter-gatherer. Step 2, step 3, farmers.
Yeah. So the other major aspect to me of the AAAs, really the other two, architecture and astronomy, are connected.
Yes.
When you're looking at it in this context of the end of the last ice age and this destruction, and then you start looking at these massive megalithic structures all over the world in various places separated by oceans that are aligned and pointing to, if you rewind the clock of the changing perspective that we have to the background stars, how they align, it seems to be pinpointing various different time periods, but you can also see it as a way to, because this processional cycle is so long and cyclical, that you can keep track of long-term trends. So if these ancient cultures, why were they so concerned with this long-term trend? And there's a lot of evidence and ancient texts that obviously are talking about these cataclysms and the various different ages that we go through. In India, they have the cycles, the yugas, the cycles of time, and these great destructions, and then rebirth. There's the whole legend of the phoenix. This idea that we go through this destruction and rebirth over and over and over again, and the idea that we've done this like 6 or 7 times. The ancient Egyptians that spoke to Solon, that he wrote about, or that Plato wrote about, and how they were saying, oh yeah, this has happened like 7 times or whatever.
You Greeks only remember 1 cataclysm. We remember 6.
Yeah. So
Noobs.
yeah, so you start to look at it in that context, like why were they so obsessed with the motions of the stars, right? It was more than just like you've got the Mayan calendar, which is basically a calendar that its cycle ends at the end of the processional cycle, where they picked a spot, like we pick a spot for the end of the year. Mm-hmm. You could pick any other day, but we pick a spot that's basically a solstice or right near a solstice.
When you're looking at a circle, if somebody asks you where the beginning is, that part of the beginning is also the end.
Right.
And it could be any spot on the circle, and it's just as correct as any other spot.
Right. So the Mayan calendar has this, same situation. Like the end of the Mayan calendar is basically in a period where, from our perspective, on the vernal equinox, the sun is basically lined up with the center of the galaxy.
Is that thunder?
Something fell outside. I think we've got a crazy windstorm coming.
Oh, okay.
So there's all over the world, again, these astronomically aligned sites that seem to be pointing to this phenomenon of precession and sort of marking it so that you can see this vast cycle take place, or at least set a point at which the site was built. Right. This site was built here. And then there's all these warnings in the mythology surrounding these areas to beware of the end of days.
Yeah.
The destruction is coming. So it's
the end is nigh.
Yeah. So it's very suggestive. Like when you look at this whole thing that you've got Göbekli Tepe, as we discussed, that was built right near after the end of this massive cataclysm. And it looks like it might be astronomical. Of course, they put a massive roof over it, so it's very hard to tell.
It's definitely got symbols on it, animal symbols on it that are in many ways associated with astronomy symbols, right? the constellations.
Yes.
So,
And these, zodiacal constellations.
Yes, yeah.
At that, which are basically the sun passes through them throughout the year, or from our perspective, those constellations seem to move around in a circle behind the sun.
yes.
So over precession, it goes around in a circle behind the sun in reverse. So you can sort of clock this motion. Anyway, you tie all these things together, and it's like the architecture is designed to withstand the force of time.
Right.
The destructive force of time. They are designed in ways that are just mind-blowing. The way they put these things together, they can withstand earthquakes, they can withstand all this crazy devastation. And they're also pinpointing a time in the sky that is relevant to the people who built them. And they come with warnings about the end that's coming again.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, you can imagine following this whole idea that there was a previous advanced civilization that witnessed this destructive force, and then the remains of that civilization tried to do something about it in terms of the future. Like
Right.
what the people in the future, we need to build something so that they will know and that they can prepare. And it's like, it sounds biblical, but it is. It's like that's to me, that is
It's
what
ancient textual.
Yeah.
All ancient texts say this in some way or another.
Right.
In many cases, yeah.
Right.
All ancient texts say this like 100% of the time, 70% of the time.
Yeah. So you can imagine if it's like, it's a fun thought experiment to imagine what we would do today if something happened. Like if we got hit by a meteorite that just wiped out almost everybody, and there were these small groups, pockets of people, and there were some scientists in there, and there were various different people that have different expertise and knowledge about various different fields. You might come together and say, dude, we need to do something, and we got to preserve the knowledge that we had, because humanity's going to lose it.
Right.
When we all die off and our children's die off, it's all going to be a legend.
Yeah.
That we were able to, fly in the sky on these great eagles and speak to each other with magical boxes all the way across the world or into the sky.
Yeah.
And there were watchers up there in their secret bunkers in space stations and in secret outer space, flying around and like talking to the oracle and asking all the questions and giving us the answers. It's like so easily imaginable to imagine that this will turn into these crazy legends that later peoples, when they begin to rediscover these things, will start to say, all that stuff's crap, because the context of what they knew was lost in translation over the eons.
And the technological jargon is lost.
Right.
And then the people are still trying to tell the stories, but they have to couch it in analogies.
Yeah, because their children's children don't have an iPhone and have never seen one and don't understand how it could possibly work.
Right, but they might say that we got knowledge from apples.
That's right.
I mean, the concept that the apple of Eden is a technological device from an ancient advanced civilization was like geniusly put into like the video game series Assassin's Creed, right? That the apple was an object that was a technological thing that held knowledge, right? So this concept does exist out there, and it gets into this sort of popular culture in various ways. And I mean, even if you look at the apple on your Apple device, the bite taken out of it is a clue, right? That's the point. It is the apple of knowledge from the tree of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a bite taken out of it, because we've all taken the bite.
I heard another idea that it was that Turing, or
Alan Turing,
he actually committed suicide, and he dipped an apple in cyanide and took a bite out of it.
Oh, wow. I hadn't heard that. That's crazy.
And so that was the impetus for the symbol on the computer. Wasn't he basically he was kind of like the inventor of the...
Yeah, of modern computing.
Yeah. I thought that was cool anyway.
That is interesting. I didn't know he committed suicide. I could understand that. I think he was, well, we won't get into that.
Yeah.
So you're right. So the AAAs that we talk about, the agriculture it's mysterious. It's sort of glossed over. You know, they went from hunter gatherers to being farmers, and it's just that's not clear. The architecture and the other thing that makes the thing that makes it not clear is that it just shows up in the most ancient of cases, and in some cases
that's the context. All of this seems like what you said in the first segment, that there were these vast civilizations that just seemed to pop up out of nowhere, full with writing and all this quote unquote mythology.
Yeah,
and then they just vanish.
Right. That's right.
All over the world, and then when you start to dig into these structures that they built, they're all astronomically aligned. They're warning us about a destruction, and then like if you start to look at the possible timing of these astronomical alignments, and it's pointing.
Right. And some people I've seen, okay, so this is one of the questions. Well, like, okay, our civilization, technologically speaking, just sprang up almost out of nowhere, you know, in the big scheme of things. In the last 200 years, we've just bam, right? But and that's true. But the thing is that our form of writing has been around for a while. Like, let's just for now, let's just go with the English language. You can trace that back for many, many hundreds of years and see that there people were writing in this with this same sort of alphabetic script.
I mean, the Phoenicians.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm talking about our alphabet.
Yeah.
And now you go and try to read something in Old English and it's not easy.
Yeah.
Okay? It's changed much. But like the writing system existed. Okay? And even at that time, they were building cathedrals.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can't say that just like the cathedrals are the things that are most likely to survive from our civilization, aside from like hydroelectric dams and stuff like that. But yeah, so if there's a big cataclysm, the thing that's going to survive is stuff we built out of stone.
Right.
And that will be all that survives. The stone thing, like imagine a cathedral with all the stuff it has in it and all the other things. The only thing left will be the stone. All the windows will be gone. All the metal will be gone. Right? Because even if it's not destroyed, eventually people will come and get that metal to make tools.
Yeah.
If they survive whatever destroys everything else. You pull the metal off there because you want to make tools with it, and eventually the metal's all gone and all the other stuff in there is all gone, and all you have are sockets in the stone and just open, you know. So you go at like the idea of the Stone Age, the basic idea of the Stone Age, archaeologically speaking, is people who make tools out of stone, like chipped flint stuff. Okay. But it becomes more and more obvious as time goes on that farther and farther back, the Stone Age actually includes megalithic architecture in the sense that people were building enormous things out of stone that still to survive to this day, like the pyramids, like the platforms at Baalbek the Temple Mount, like a lot of the stuff in South America, okay, like a lot of the pyramids in Central America. So you have these gigantic stone constructions, and we look at them today, and they're empty of all possible other things that probably did exist in them and may have, in some cases, been vastly technological. Like the pyramids, it's possible that they were some sort of power plant, because the interior, if you look at the interior designs of the Giza pyramids, they make no sense in any way. Like they just don't make any sense. Like number one, they don't make sense as tombs at all. Like Egypt made lots of tombs and they're beautiful. And they have big, wide hallways with arched ceilings where a whole procession could go in there carrying the sarcophagus of the pharaoh and blah, blah, blah. And then they've got these gigantic rooms down in there but the pyramids don't have that. The entrance of the pyramid is a tiny tunnel that you have to squat in, and it's tilted at like some 35, 45 degrees or whatever.
26.
Yeah. So they look more like the interiors of machines is the point. And this is, so when we were younger, we used to go to some old military bases that had just like giant slabs of concrete in places and there were like weird dips in them and squares and other pockets and stuff, and you can't tell what was in there, but you knew that it was machinery of some kind or other things bolted to the concrete. And that's a lot of these ancient sites have anomalous features that look like that. Now, I'm not necessarily saying there were machines there, but there was definitely something there. That's what those sockets are for. Okay. So we'll get into this after we take the break, but I just want to preface this with saying that like a lot of the stuff that's called ceremonial or that's called tombs or that's called a temple now, those words are misleading. Maybe not intentionally so, but they are misleading, and we'll get into that after the break.
Scratching the surface of every rabbit hole we can think of. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, returning for the final segment of the final hour. So it's pretty difficult to, like we were saying in the beginning, give a 2-hour dissertation on how to enter the rabbit hole because it's really just like
follow the ancient rabbit. That's how you do it.
Yeah. There's freaking holes everywhere. So pick one. Another good one is, if you're from the United States, look into giants.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. Anything that sort of does the job of wiping the standard model slate clean. I found this through doing research in physics too. It's like in any of the sciences, when you really start to dig in to what are the scientists actually saying? What are they reporting from their studies? And the good ones will say, we don't know. Like, this is our best guess. But the truth is, we have no idea.
Right.
And tomorrow, something could be discovered that rewrites the whole. Right.
And it's another thing that I've learned is it's best to bet on that. The history of science is that we have been wrong about almost everything. All the time, right? People think they kind of come up with an idea of what they think is happening, and it's wrong. And like if you go back 10 years, there are lots of things that people thought were true then that are no longer considered to be true, and there are things that people thought were not true back then that are now considered to be true. And if you go back 100 years, there's a lot more of those things.
Yeah.
So the trend continues, like the assumption that just because it's current date means that now that trend is almost over and that we pretty much have the whole thing sort of wrapped up and we just got to work out the details is silly because everyone has always thought that.
Right. Just using physics as an example, we were using Newtonian physics for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And everybody was just like, this is it.
Right.
These are all the rules.
Yeah.
But the more the real scientists, the real guys in the weeds looking at everything and comparing everything knew there were problems, but there was no theory. And then Einstein comes up with a couple of things and ends up with, general relativity. And that just changes the game. So then now it's like, okay, Newtonian physics works for all of this stuff that, we can use it.
But the way things really work
is this other way.
This other way.
And then that was going well for a while. And then quantum physics, bam, it's like, people, like that was happening at the same time. But when they really started to make discoveries, beyond the math.
Quantum physics required a lot more technology.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's still happening today. Like I've been listening to really doing a lot of physics research recently. And I'm hearing stuff that I'm just like, these guys some of these guys are old and they've been doing this stuff for a long time and they knew Einstein, they knew, and they are now thinking something is about to happen that's going to rewrite the textbooks. You know, I mean, it's like this is still happening. It's always happening. Archaeology happens to be a field where that type of sentiment is not common.
Right.
Now, with physicists, it's very common.
Right. It's just not. The thing about physics is that the details are so detailed that most people see physics from far off, and they see a sort of what looks like a complete picture. But as soon as you start zooming in and looking at the details, you find out that there's all these holes in it.
Yeah, the main difference
looks like a flat, straight line from far away.
Right. The main difference is the physicists have mathematicians, and mathematicians are figuring out proofs, and they're like, okay, all of this math works. Now, what's the theory behind why, and what is the mechanism? You know.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody's arguing and disagreeing about in physics. But in archaeology, we don't have mathematicians that are giving you things that you know are true.
Right.
There is none of that. So it's the equivalent to the mathematicians are these structures. They exist, and we know they are true.
Yeah.
Now, the archaeologists come along and try to develop a theory about how it is, and that's all they are.
Right.
Is theories.
Yeah. Archaeology is a social science. It is a quote unquote soft science. There are hard scientific aspects of it in that, like, you get out there in the field and you sort of grid everything off, and then there's like the
methods and practices.
Practices, yes. But in the end, it is not one of the STEM subjects that is like mathematical and you know, based in hard science. In other words, it's a lot of guesswork, and it's based on, you know, very few and far between evidence. That's the other thing. Like, think about your entire house. Okay, let's say your whole house is there, and your family has lived in it for your entire life. And then one day, let's just picture your house by itself. Okay, and your whole family's lived there, and you've got all this history, all this stuff in there, and everything. And then giant lightning bolt hits it. The whole thing gets set on fire, gets burned down flat, and then it all gets covered in mud, and then it stays there for thousands of years. Okay. Now somebody shows up way later after the mud is sort of eroded away, and they start digging it out, and they're finding bits and pieces of things. Are they going to be able to build your entire family story? No, they're not going to be. The photographs are all going to be gone. All the documents are going to be completely gone. There's going to be hard things that are left over. Most of the metals will be gone, right? You're going to have certain
couple of gold rings,
right? There might be some gold objects, maybe some silver things or whatever. They're going to be heavily corroded if there's any metal left. They're going to have to guess, and they are not going to be able to tell the story of your family.
Yeah,
it isn't clear how many of you there were based on the artifacts that are left and how many rooms there are. That's just not clear. I mean, you could have had multiple people in one room, or you had whole rooms that were not used. It's just the story is almost impossible to tell, right? Yeah. So with incredibly ancient civilizations, this is the problem. We have like the bare remnants, the stuff that lasts for thousands of years left over. And in some cases, another good part of that analogy would have been to imagine that like everything happens, the whole house burns down. And then for the after 1,000 years or so, when the mud erodes away, somebody else comes and builds another house on top of the platform that your house was on, and they lived there for a long time, and then that house burns down, and then somebody else comes over there and puts a teepee up and like lives in that and has a campfire, you know, and you have like thousands of years of occupation. Now, is somebody going to be able to dig through all that stuff and figure out your family story at the very bottom when people have been looting the site, taking those golden rings and turning them into things, trading them? No, it's the concrete is all that's left, and it's going to have weird anomalous holes in it where there were pipes and things. And people are, oh, this is a ceremonial well where they were dropped, you know, it's because they found a golden ring down in the bottom of the sewage thing or whatever.
Somebody dropped it down the shower drain or whatever by accident.
It's like, we don't know because we don't know. That's the thing. And when there's no textual, the quote unquote recorded history, which begins with the Sumerians when people started writing stuff down. Well, according to the model that we have now, it begins with the Sumerians when people were writing things. Sumerians invented writing according to the standard model. But there are anomalous artifacts that have script on them that have been found all over the world. So again, what happens is people, because it's a social science and people are trying to put together a coherent story, and this coherent story has been around for hundreds of years in Western academia, it's difficult to change it. You know, because when you go all the way back to the beginning of their coherent story, if you change one tiny little thing there, like the age of the Sphinx, for example, it changes everything.
Yeah.
The entire story has to be thrown out. So
Yeah, and that's another great rabbit hole that you finally get a quote unquote hard scientist or a hard science guy.
yeah,
Robert Schoch, who comes and looks at the Sphinx because it's actually dug out of the bedrock. He's not really looking at the Sphinx. He's looking at the part that was never restored, which is the wall, the enclosure where they cut the stones out going down, and he's seeing water erosion, just like all the other water erosion that he's been studying as a geologist for years. And he looks back through the standard model of geology and what we've understood from ice cores and whatever about the different types of weather patterns that are happening. And he comes up with, in his estimation, a very conservative date of roughly around 12,000 years.
Yeah.
Is how long that's enclosure has been exposed. Conservative date for him. Like
that's the most recent one. Yeah. It could be thousands, many thousands of years older than that.
Right. And that was just, completely ridiculed. And then they find Göbekli Tepe. Right. Nobody could build anything like this out of stone at that time.
Yeah.
You're a kook. And then they find Göbekli Tepe, which was built at that time and is, the skill involved is comparable.
Right.
So,
no one talks about that.
Right. It's
Sphinx is still 3,000 years old.
Yeah, but it's
or
awesome.
5,000 years old.
It's
sorry.
awesome.
Yeah.
So to me, the thing that excites me the most, and I'm sure I have a confirmation bias about it, but whatever, is the idea that this most recent cataclysm, the end of the last ice age, roughly 12, 13,000 years ago, that there was some high civilization, however you define it, a civilization capable that had the knowledge of the three A's: agriculture, astronomy, and architecture, and possibly many other things, lived and existed in areas of the world that are now covered in oceans, or that were completely wiped out in the cataclysm, and the remnants of that civilization moved on and tried to preserve their knowledge. And this is where,
and in some cases, tried to pass it on to other peoples they found.
This is where these legacies come from. This is where the mythology comes from. When you start to look at all the different mythologies all over the world, they have this character that is very similar to each other. A lot of the stories are the same. A lot of the buildings look the same. A lot of the architecture looks the same. And I just think that's fascinating. And so the pursuit for me is finding more of these connections. So reading the ancient texts, looking and observing photographs, images of the ancient sites, reading people's scientists' accounts of what they found, and comparing all of this stuff and trying to find these connections.
Yeah,
it's just
all right. So let's
awesome.
Let's go through some questions here. First one: are we talking about Atlantis?
I would say yes.
Yeah, because Atlantis has become a catch-all word for an ancient and advanced civilization that was destroyed in a global cataclysm of some kind.
Right.
If you just take it at its base, just the most base value of it, Plato gave a lot of details, okay, telling you how big the city was and all this kind of stuff. But the basic idea of that story is that there was an ancient advanced civilization that was very advanced and were globetrotting. In other words, they went all over the world.
That existed 9,000 years before the time of Solon.
Right. Which puts them right up to the end of the last ice age.
Or they were destroyed at that time. Yeah.
Right, exactly. They existed right up to the end of the ice age, and wham.
And to me, I don't interpret that as a single city. I mean, he did talk about a single city, and that's,
that was the central city. That
right.
was the capital, basically.
Right. When you look at, a lot of the people, Atlantis seekers, they're all looking for one place.
Yeah,
whatever.
A place.
That's fine, but I think that it's just more evidence of the existence of. I don't think it's a single place. I think they were global.
Yeah, of course.
The
I mean,
knowledge.
Plato says that they were global.
Yeah.
They fought a war with the Raman civilization, right? And possibly the Osirian one, which was in the area of Egypt. Or they fought a war with another advanced civilization, and in his story, he says that they got so arrogant in their power that something destroyed them. Now, what that means, I don't know, but the point is that in his story, he indicates that there were other advanced civilizations that were able to fight and hold their own in a war with Atlantis, right? So we have to assume that there were multiple advanced civilizations or we have to assume that that's what he meant. That's what the story tells us. And of course, the Egyptian guy who was talking to Solon was also saying that, like the Osirian civilization, that their, according to them, civilization stemmed from. Now, this is the other thing. So the Atlantis question brings me to another thing that is a very fascinating rabbit hole to go down that outlines this whole thing. And that is that in some cases, there are textual references that archaeologists use today to sort of place things like kings. They're called king lists. Sumer had them. Egypt had them. There's other ones. I can't remember what they are right now. But the point is that there are these lists that ain't very, very ancient, like dawn of time or dawn of written word civilization time had these lists. And they, according to their own lists, extend their civilizations back many tens of thousands of years than we do, right? The Egyptian king list goes back hundreds of thousands of years. There are some kings in it that apparently reigned for impossible periods of time, tens of thousands of years. The Sumerian king list is the same thing. Somewhat similar to the biblical patriarchs in the Old Testament that lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Methuselah being the most famous, that lived for almost 1,000 years, 900 and something. Noah supposedly lived for 600 and something years, right? So you have many ancient myths that talk about all way back in the past. In the very distant ancient past, people had incredibly long lifespans, and these lifespans slowly grew shorter over time according to their lists. Now, what's fascinating is that when you look at the archaeological story, they totally go by the king lists, especially in Egypt, to tell us what king built what temple or when they existed, because they're going by the king lists, right? That were written in stone. So they're like, okay, so this guy existed at this point, and his reign lasted for this long, and he built this pyramid and that temple. But they totally ignore the beginning parts of the king list that have all of these very long-lived, very much more ancient kings that extend the civilization back hundreds of thousands of more years. So in other words, they have this whole list, and they're like, well, this part of it we believe because it fits our prejudices, but this part is bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like, I always complain about people using courtroom references when they're talking about science, but in this case, it's an apt analogy. You can't bring in something into a courtroom and present it as evidence and say, but ignore this part of the evidence. Just look at this part, right? Yeah. That doesn't work, right? You can't do that. And that doesn't work in science either. You can't say, well, just this part is okay. This part's bullshit, right? No, you have to look at all the evidence. And if you're going to say that you accept this part, then you have to explain why you don't accept this part. And their explanation is it's obviously mythological.
Yeah.
Obvious to what? Because you don't believe it, right? You believe this part and not that part.
Yeah.
And these lists were official, right? So the explanation there is like, well, they had this mythological beginning of their civilization. Everybody does that, right? All these ancient civilizations had these. They like to pretend that they came from these like auspicious beginnings with these gods.
It's kind of the mammoth in the room, right? Yeah. They all have these mythological beginnings,
right? Oh, they all do it.
The
really?
Scientists don't accept, right? Right. We did that. We created an entire mythology about how we all came from Europe.
Yeah.
And other
totally
places
fabricated.
In the world. Yeah, it was just made it all up. There was a king, and he sent us all over here.
Yeah.
It's totally fake.
Right. It's a completely fake story. So the king lists are, to me, a large chunk of evidence that I was fascinated with for a long time, still am. And they're not explained. And and really, when you look at the spans of time, they're mathematical in some ways. They have all these various strange mathematical things in them.
Processional numbers, yeah.
Right, processional
Astronomical numbers.
Astronomical numbers. And that may or may not mean that there's something more going on there than just giving a list of kings. But it isn't clear why they suddenly started giving a list of kings that had, quote unquote, believable lifespans. And then they had lists that were unbelievable. And of course, the archaeologists will say, well, the dividing line is where it became myth, right? And you're like, well, why was that dividing line there in the first place? And why do you, my question is always like, why do you follow this part of it as though it's gospel and get mad at anybody who thinks something differently, but the rest of it is all myth, and get mad? You get mad if anybody believes that part.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you at least, try to understand why this might be happening? And okay, to give some people credit that some people have, there have been plenty of people who have looked at the King's List and tried to understand the lists in terms of math and said symbolism or whatever, and said like maybe these kings did. But even if you did a whole bunch of math and like got the reign times of these kings down to quote unquote believable lengths, you still have a civilization that is far older than you initially thought it was, and that the standard model says it is now. So I love the King's List subject.
Yeah.
So a lot of ancient civilizations have these quote unquote myths that put their beginnings as going, or not even. So a lot of the South American civilizations, they're not even talking about their own beginnings. They talk about much more ancient previous civilizations that were not them.
Right.
Right. And then in some cases, what's even more fascinating there are some sites, and this is the ones I know the most about are in the Americas, but there are also ones elsewhere in the quote unquote old world where there are no legends about them. No one, including the locals, have any idea where they came from or how they got there.
Yeah.
Those are also fascinating, Like, for example, there's a site in South America in Peru, on the border of Peru and Bolivia, where when the Spaniards that were there, first showing up or whatever, they asked the local natives, like, and it was this giant, it's all these megalithic blocks all over the place.
Pumapunku?
Yeah. The Spaniards asked the locals, like, well, did you guys build that? And they're like, no. That was the gods, is what their answer was, basically. But it's basically more like, we don't know. It was obviously the gods, because look at it, right?
Yeah.
That was basically the answer. So, Nan Madol is kind of like that. There's a place in the Pacific, in Oceania, on an island called Pompeii, I think, or it's not like Pompeii in ancient Greece, but it sounds like that. The island is called that. But the place is like completely anomalous, built out of unbelievable megalithic stones, and there are millions of tons of it. And there aren't any. No one knows who built it. The natives that live on the island are terrified of that entire side of the island. They won't even go over there.
Yeah.
But if you look at the archaeological story, it's like 1,500 years old.
Yeah.
And they attribute it to the people who were last there that lived in some of the remnants of the structures that were building fires in there. They're like, well, yeah, there's old fires here, and we date it to being, 1,500 years ago. I'm like, okay, that's like going back to the analogy of the house. You attribute the entire house structure to the last people who built a campfire on top of the platform.
Yeah.
So that happens with a lot of ancient cultures.
That's another thing, like the Moai on Easter Island, for
Right.
example. Like they attribute all that to 1,500 years ago or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. That the Easter Island statues were all cut and put into place within 100 years of when the Europeans showed up.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating, and I found this out by, I was digging through some museum had a sort of a catalog of images of Easter Island stuff, and then some of them were these sketches, very detailed, beautiful pencil sketches done by some of the first explorers to show up at Easter Island, right? So they were sitting there in some place and they're drawing the statues, and it's all very precise and very clean. And you can look at a picture, a modern day picture of that same place where that person was sitting and compare them, and nothing has changed.
Right.
They're almost exactly identical. In other words, the statues are buried up to their chins. They're tilted over. And so if that's true, and that European who showed up there and sketched that less than 100 years after those statues were put in place, you have to believe that all of the burying of the statues, which is in some cases 30 feet or more of material, happened within 100 years of them being put up and then stopped.
Yeah. No evidence for that whatsoever.
Right. And that would be cataclysmic. In other words, it would have knocked the statues over, but they're all leaning as though all that material has been slowly moving down the mountain and sort of burying them very slowly and tilting them very slowly over time until they have these cool tilted aspects to them, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's crazy. You look at these very old European drawings and then a picture of it in the modern day, and they look exactly the same.
Yep. And there's a platform there that the stonework on the platform is identical in nature to
Stuff in Peru.
Yeah. And
in ancient Greece.
The really old stuff like down in the Osirian or whatever in Egypt. It's just like...
And that platform, one of the stones, is a piece of a statue.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah.
You can see that they reused something there. It's like, so in a lot of cases...
And there's writing there that was found that looks nearly identical to another form of writing that was found in Turkey or something like that.
Oh, yeah, the Mohenjo-Daro stuff.
Okay, yeah, the Rongo writing from
Easter Island
Easter
looks
Island.
exactly like the Mohenjo-Daro script, which is...
And neither one's ever been translated. They don't know...
Mohenjo-Daro is like East India-Pakistan border. Yeah.
It's just... Everything we know is wrong. That's basically the deal.
In a lot of cases...
That's why we give out certificates of ignorance.
Right. Certificates of ignorance, because everything we know is wrong. And until you admit that we're wrong about everything, you can't start trying to figure out what's right. There's also plenty of other anomalous stuff all over the world, like just to name a few, like that I love. Cart ruts. Ruts in stone that look like they were made by wheeled vehicles when the stone was soft. And there's examples of this in the Americas, in the Mediterranean areas. There are a ton of them on Malta. They're in Turkey. They're probably elsewhere. I'm sure there's some in Egypt, but most of them are probably under the sand.
One of my favorite things is the legends of magic and how they are everywhere you look to find anything on these old ancient legends of magic. It's all astronomical.
Yeah.
It's all connected to...
Right. You draw big circles with diagrams in them that look a lot like constellations.
Yeah, but the times and dates that you have to do things and under the specific positions of the planets and the way that connects to this weird idea of astrology and how the positions of planets and stars and all this kind of stuff is going to tell you your fate.
Right.
And then you compare that to the idea of this cataclysm and that there are these cycles of destruction and rebirth of the earth. And it's cool. That's one of my favorite things to do.
That is true. Yeah. The whole astrology is a misunderstood ancient science that is now called astronomy. And if you do know cycles of astronomy, it does tell you the fate of things.
That's right.
You can tell the future because everything in space goes around in circles in some way or another. It's like alchemy. Alchemy became chemistry.
Yeah.
Right? Like the study of ancient alchemy that was revived in Europe by the translation of the Hermetica from ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
Well, originated, as far as we know, with ancient Egypt, was translated into Greek, and then ended up in Byzantine Rome. And that book was eventually brought to Europe and translated, and then it caused the Renaissance, practically caused the Renaissance, right? It began the scientific technological age that we know of now.
Yeah. And the idea that
from ancient Egypt.
Yeah. And the idea that there are these vast cosmic weather patterns. Like we are studying weather on the Earth right now, and we know that there are these jet streams of air that have these patterns that are going to push cold air, and then the Earth is going to move around the sun, and the position of the poles tilt in reference to the sun is going to change seasons, and the currents of air are going to swirl over here, and the ocean currents, the Pacific decadal oscillation changes every 10 years going one way and then flips to the other. It's a 20-year cycle that changes the weather. We have El Nino and La Nina, these different jet stream patterns so there are these long cycles, quote unquote, long cycles of weather on the Earth. There is a long cycle of weather in the cosmos. We have, similar to the jet streams, meteor streams that have been there for thousands and thousands of years. And our position as we move around and everything is shifting in these cyclical motions over long periods of time, sometimes we get the rains coming from that jet stream.
That's right.
And those cause cataclysms. So you look at this precessional cycle, this long way of sort of clocking the cosmic weather patterns that affect the Earth. And you can see as you go back in time, like, bam, destruction, bam, fertilization, rebirth.
Yeah.
Another destruction, fertilization, rebirth, and so on.
Exactly. And that's why at the beginning of every podcast we have Space Weather News.
Very important.
Space Weather News is incredibly important.
We have a variable star.
That's right. And we have a variable universe. Like, the standard model tells us that the universe itself has evolved, right? The story of the Big Bang. You start out with nothing, and then bam, and then ever since then, the universe has been changing drastically over short and long periods of time. And things have been developing and evolving and changing and developing. And you have patterns and cycles. And everything in space is going around or whirlpooling or spinning or orbiting or something in circles. And so when you see these ancient sites with spirals all over them, and then there are these long, sinuous, snake-looking forms that are built into the ground that, like, just happen to, like, predict freaking lunar eclipses.
Yeah. And then it's like looking at all of that stuff, then you start to ask yourself, what would we do, if we experienced some cataclysm? And that's...
What would Snake Bros do?
No,
awesome
our civilization.
Oh, okay.
Awesome fossil face, that's right. Strike a pose. Try to become an out-of-place artifact.
That's right.
No, but as a civilization, what would we do? We would try to preserve these...
#UPart challenge.
These fundamental understandings of the universe. Like, hey, we're actually going around... That sun is what's giving us the energy of life all the time. So you could see we're trying to preserve this knowledge, and then eventually people, what we call quant suff it, they lose the context and they start worshiping the sun, quote unquote worship. Right. And it's we're trying to tell them that is where the energy is coming from.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think we've done the best we could on the broad brush, not diving into the rabbit holes too far, but showing you where all the rabbit holes are idea.
And thanks for the suggestion. That was a good suggestion. We needed to do this.
Yes.
At least give it a shot.
It was a fantastic suggestion. I totally enjoyed doing this show. That was a lot of fun. We haven't done something like this since the beginning, so.
We'll do it again on episode 164.
Yeah. All right. You guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com.
You can visit the website at brothersoftheserpent.com. And comment there. Check out the encyclopedia in the glossary of terms.
That's right. And follow us on Twitter. I'm having all kinds of awesome Twitter conversations with people, and I'm posting pics there. And the Twitter handle is @SnakeBros with no vowels, SNKBRS.
And share the shows.
That's right. And don't forget to donate to our pyramid scheme, which sends us straight to pyramids. You can find the donate button on the upper right part of the website on the front page.
Yeah, and thank you everyone who has donated.
Yes, thank you guys so much.
We are getting more donations, and it's totally awesome. Thank you, and you, and you, and you, and you.
That's right. And also, I want to tell you guys again, this dude, History Shift, Brandon Ricks, has become even more awesome since the last time I told you about him. You can follow him at History Shift on Twitter. He always posts lots of cool stuff there. He has a YouTube channel. You can find him at History Shift. Just look up History Shift on YouTube. You can find him there. He has been making the Snake Bros podcasts into videos to post on the internet, and he's already sent me like 8 or 9 of them. I'm redoing.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's so awesome, dude. I just want to tell you, Brandon, History Shift, dude, you're awesome. And the conversations we're having that are ongoing are also awesome. So you're a badass, bro. Thank you so much. You are a godsend. And I think that's it. Thank you guys so much. We also love all of you listeners. You are also totally awesome. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.